Hi, I'm Chuck Lamson, and I've decided to make a bread making video. This is sourdough bread because a lot of people have asked for a start of my sourdough, and then I get a few questions about the recipe, so I'm just going to go ahead and demonstrate. Okay, so this recipe will make 2 loaves of bread. You can easily cut everything in half and just make 1 loaf of bread. Sometimes I do that. First thing I want to do is weigh my flour. So I use 6 cups of flour. For 1 loaf I just use 3 cups, but I weigh it because I want to get the ratio of water correct. And every time you measure flour, it has a little bit different level of density or compaction. And so in order to get the proper hydration, then you want to weigh it. Hydration just means the percent by weight of water that you put with the flour. So, before I start, maybe I'll just show you. In preparation, I've taken and activated a start of my sourdough. So I took a spoonful of my start out of the fridge, put it in this glass, dissolved it in about 1 cup of warm water, and then when it was dissolved in there pretty well, then I added 1 cup of flour, stirred it all up, and it makes a nice gooey, bubbly mess like that, which I can later use as my sourdough yeast in my bread. So I've got a scale here. I want to go ahead and put the bowl on the scale, and then I turn it on, and that way it will zero with the bowl on there. Now anything I add there will be weighed. So I'm going to add 6 cups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so how much does that weigh? That weighs 976 grams. I'm using grams. You can use ounces because all we're interested in is getting 70% of that. So that's almost 1,000 grams. I'm going to go ahead and write it down. 974 grams. And later on when I measure out my water, I will multiply that by 0.77. For now, I want to add a tablespoon of salt. Oh, there's my salt. I want to add the salt to the dry flour so that I can get it mixed in well. If I add it later on to the dough after the water's added, too much, then it will be harder to mix it in uniformly. So I just put it in there. I'll probably fast forward this because I like to spend a bit of time mixing this in, but okay, so that's pretty good. Now, next thing I want to do is calculate 77% of this 974 grams. So 974 times 0.77 equals 750 grams. So that's how much water I want. Okay, in this next step, I'm going to measure out the water, and I'm going to mix a cup of my activated starter with it. So I go ahead and put the bowl onto the scale again, and I zero it out. Now whatever water I put in there gets weighed. I've got written down here 750 grams of warm water. I've already kind of warmed up the water from my faucet, so I'm going to measure out 750 grams. 724. 740, just a little teeny bit more. 752, that's close enough. Okay, so next thing I want to do is put a cup of my starter into there. Nice thing about it being nice and gooey like this is you can just pour it right out of the jar into the measuring cup. And then I put that in the water. Now, one thing to note here is this, I've still got some leftover activated starter in there. I'm actually going to refresh my starter with this. The one that's been in the fridge for a while, maybe it's been in there 2 weeks, and I used it to start this one. I will go ahead and wash that little jar out and replace it with this, and that'll be my new starter. All right, my spatula. I just want to go ahead and mix this starter in there and get it mostly dissolved in the water. The reason for that is I just want to get it nice and dispersed in the water, because then when it goes into the flour, it's going to disperse in that whole mixture. And if I was to add that starter later after I add the water and I have a big ball of dough, it would be quite difficult to get the yeast that's in the starter dispersed evenly in that ball of dough. So this way it's going to all be nice and even. I'm just going to pour it in there. Now I'll mix that up. I've got this nice big spatula that Sherry bought, stainless steel with a nice silicone spatula on the end that I really like to use for making bread. And I just scrape the sides and the bottom as I go, and gradually mix that flour and water together until it's fairly uniform. You don't want to overdo it, because you'll see in the next steps that will get it more uniform. I'm just trying to get that crusty stuff off the bottom and the sides mixed in with the lump. Okay, so that's a kind of a stiff ball of flour, and that's good enough, because this next step, what I mentioned this word allaise means, is it's kind of the magic of the water and the yeast dissolving into the salt and flour mixture, and it will become much more uniform. And when I come back in a half an hour and start to stretch it, it'll be much better than if I just tried to work with it like this. So I always cover it with a dishcloth. That just keeps it from drying out too much, and I'll come back in a half an hour and we'll show you the next step. Okay, I'm back. So this has been resting for half an hour. So I'm gonna open it up and see it's just kind of settled in there. And then now this is the fun part. This is the stretching and folding. And we're gonna do stretch and fold 5 times. And then we're gonna let it rest another 15 minutes. Do another 5 times, let it rest another 15 minutes, do it another 5 times. I probably won't show you all of those, but let me show you how it goes. You just put your fingers under the dough and you just lift it, stretch it. See how easy it is to stretch this first time? And then I fold it over and flop it down. That's one. And then I rotate it a little bit, do it again. And I pull it up and stretch it. That's 2. I'm going to rotate it again, pull it up and stretch it, and each time it's getting a little tougher. And that's that gluten toughening up. 3, 4. So this time it's really not easy to stretch. I think I'm on 4. I think this is the 5th one. But now it's pretty much a ball, and you can feel that gluten toughening up. And that's because we're not making Wonder Bread here. We're making the kind of bread our forefathers ate in the old country. It's going to have a tough crust, and it's going to have a lot of texture. And if you take a slice of it and eat it, you're going to last all day growing sugar beets. So I'm going to go ahead and let it rest again for another 15 minutes. I'll do that same thing, stretch and fold 5 times, and then 1 more time after that. And I'll probably come back to you on the last time. Okay, I'm back again. In the meantime, I have done another 5 stretch and folds. This is the last 5. You look at this now, it looks different. It's starting to have a more silky appearance. And actually when I grab it and stretch it, it has relaxed now since the last one. And it will be much easier to stretch on this first stretch. Stretch is pretty good. Stretch it out nice and long and fold it. 1. Also, you notice that it doesn't really stick to your hands very much. 2. And now it's really tough. 3. It just doesn't want to stretch. 4, but that's good. See, it's turning into a nice, tough piece of dough. Everything's nice and uniform. I don't have lumps. And so now, from this point on, you want to kind of become friends with this because you want to treat it nicely. I'll kind of show you as I go, but you don't want to press on it or destroy the bubbles too much. But we're going to go ahead and let this rise for until it's about double in size. And there's various ways to do that. If this was morning and I was going to go off to work for 8 hours, I could go ahead and let it rise somewhere in the house, covered so that it doesn't dry out too much. In this case, because I'm working from home these days, this is during the COVID-19 pandemic, so I want to see if I can get this risen. It's 9 o'clock now by about noon. So I'm going to give it a little warmer place, and I'll go ahead and start the oven. I'll just heat up the oven for a couple of minutes until I can kind of reach in there and touch the surfaces, and they're warm to touch but not too hot. And then I'll cover this with plastic so it doesn't evaporate out, and I'll put it in the oven with the oven off, of course, and just let it rise in there for about 3 hours, and then we'll come back to it and I'll show you the rest. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is put some flour on my countertop. I need plenty of space because I make 2 loaves here. I need to do this without them sticking to the granite because the dough is kind of wet. It has 70% hydration, 77%. So when I do this, I'm just going to gently pour this out. I don't want to grab it out and mold it because that roughness will actually destroy what I've just done in raising this. It's got a lot of bubbles in it, and that's what I want in the final loaf. So I'm just going to use my spatula, and as I tilt the bowl, separate the dough from the bread from the bowl and pour it out onto the flour. See lots and lots of bubbles in this, which is great. I just kind of pour it out into a blob. All right, perfect. Now I'm going to divide it. It's going to be a little sticky, so I'm going to put a little bit of flour actually on top here so that I can handle it. And again, this is my friend now. I want to be kind to it. And so I'm not going to treat it roughly at all. First thing I'm going to do is just divide it at about 50-50 into 2 loaves. Trying to disturb it as little as possible. Okay, and now I'm going to coax it, each one, into a rectangle. I'm not going to roll them or push them or anything. I'm just going to kind of stretch them out with my fingers. I need to put a little more flour on there. Into kind of a little rectangle so that I can do the trifold. And as I do this, I'm trying not to destroy the bubbles that are in the dough. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just some kind of a rectangle that I can fold. Okay. So stretch that out. All right. I'm just going to trifold this 1, 2. Oops, stuck a little bit. And then I'll trifold it in the other direction. 1, 2. And now this is a loaf, but I want to get those folds underneath, on the underside. And I'm going to set it back on the counter for a half hour or so to let those folds seal. So I just set it like that. And let those folds seal. Do the same thing with this other one. Again, this is my friend. I'm going to treat it pretty nice. I'm not going to give it a name because my father always told me, don't ever name anything that you might have to eat someday. And I want to eat some of this bread. The really big bubbles, sometimes I break them, just because they'll wind up as huge holes in your bread. Okay, trifold that. Some of the excess flour off there. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Get those folds on the bottom side like that. And put it down on the flour. Okay, so now I got two pretty good loaves here going. And I want them to sit and rest and seal. So I'm going to put bowls over the top of them. One of the bowls I can use is just my mixing bowl. The only reason I put the bowls on there is to keep them from drying out again. So that'll just keep them from drying out for a half hour while that bottom sits. Well, the oven's hot and the bread is proofed for about an hour in these bowls. They're covered. I'll kind of show you what they look like. They're just a little bit bigger than they were before. Nice and fluffy and lots of bubbles in them. So I'll re-aim my camera and then I'll pull out these vessels that are at 450 degrees and we'll go ahead and start the bread baking. Okay, first we'll use the cast iron Dutch oven. 450 degrees now, and I'm going to go ahead and put, this is a parchment paper, I've used it before, that's why it's all brown. I just put that in the bottom, and then I roll this into the pot here. Come off of there. It doesn't matter if it's in there perfectly, it will straighten itself out as it bakes. Kind of hard to get them in these Dutch ovens, and so I settle for whatever it turns out to be. Here's the other vessel. This is a French thing made by Emile Henry, or as the French would say, Emile Henry. I have a little bit oversized parchment, that's so that I can, if this doesn't slide on just right, I can move it around a little bit and center it. Dump that, and it came out pretty well centered. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the lid back on. These vessels just kind of keep the steam in while it's cooking, and it makes the bread a little different texture. So let's change the angle of this. So those are in there baking at 450. I will set the timer on 20 minutes, and then at 20 minutes I'll just reach in and pull the lids off. I'll show you that when I do it so that we can brown the outside of the loaf. Okay, the first 20 minutes at 450 degrees have passed. So let's look in our oven. And I have to pull these lids off very carefully because these are really super hot. Okay, so you see that loaf is going good. And it's not brown enough yet, so I'm going to put it in for longer, but I need 2 hands for the other one, so I'm going to turn this off. Okay, so there you can see both loaves. So I'm going to put those back in for 10 to 15 minutes and they'll get nice and brown on the outside. Okay, 15 minutes later and the bread is nice and brown. I'm going to hold one up here so you can see. Nice and golden brown, a little bit dark on the bottom but not too dark. And it's got a nice thick crust and should be just right. Hope you enjoyed the video.